U.S. Chapter 20, the Vietnam War. So the overarching question is, how did the U.S. confront communism in East Asia after the Korean War? And so here's a rough timeline of kind of all the things that we've talked about throughout this chapter and unit so far. So when we look at this very first section, origins of the Vietnam War, why did the U.S. become involved in Vietnam? The objectives describe reasons that the U.S. helped the French fight Vietnamese, ways in which the U.S. opposed communism in Southeast Asia, and then how the U.S. increased its involvement in Vietnam. So when we look at kind of the background of all of this, France had controlled what is known as Indochina. That would be Vietnam, kind of Laos, Cambodia. And what you see is that they are controlling the mineral wealth of this place and then using that to kind of help enrich their own country. And so this is an image of one of the homes of a French aristocrat that lived in Vietnam. So you can kind of see how much mineral wealth they were actually able to draw to be able to afford that kind of a palace in the middle of Vietnam. When we look at Ho Chi Minh starts calling for the independence of Vietnam way back in 1912. And so when we look at the fact that the Vietnam War, at least our full participation, really starts to kind of get going in about 1964, Ho Chi Minh had been working for independence for half a century at that point. So it kind of demonstrates how dedicated he is. When we look at the French then, during World War II, they lose control of Vietnam. The Japanese come in and do take control. Post-World War II, they're going to regain control of these lost colonies. The problem for France and really the rest of Europe is that the world is a very different place after World War II. This puts kind of the U.S. in a real tough spot because they want to promote the independence of these countries from colonial powers because we realize kind of the problems that colonialism had created. And so if these countries can emerge as independent nations, we kind of like that. But at the same time, France is one of our key allies, and we can't really afford to lose them. And so we're kind of weighing the options, and we're leaning towards helping France because of World War II and the fact that they're such a close ally. What really causes us to decide that we really need to double down and help France is the fall of China to communism. So in the 1950 to 1954, when France is having difficulties, we agree to basically pay most of their bills. We give $2.6 billion to France to help pay for this war effort. Again, the French are ill-prepared for kind of the resistance. They didn't think it was going to be that bad. They eventually are narrowed down to this one fort, Dien Bien Phu, which you can kind of see in the picture in the lower right there. And they are forced to go to Geneva and sign a peace agreement. So this 1954 Geneva Accords, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, which was Indochina, they become free. They decide that Vietnam is going to be divided at the 17th parallel, and in 1956 they will hold free elections to unify the two Vietnams. So you have the communist north, the republic in the south, and basically you got 2 years, and then there's going to be an election, and may the best man, may the best plan, may the best form of government win. For the United States, we are hoping that South Vietnam will win. So we start dumping all kinds of economic and military aid into South Vietnam. We backed this guy named Diem because he is a staunch anti-communist. And when it comes to this 1956 election, both Diem and the United States realized that Ho Chi Minh is going to pretty easily win this election. So when Diem backs out of the election and says, well, I need a little bit more time to win the hearts and the minds of the people, we support him in doing that. What happens is communist opposition not only grows to the United States involvement and to South Vietnam, but the number of people in Vietnam who are supporting communism is also growing and increasing. And so the Viet Cong are these South Vietnamese communists, and pretty much across South Vietnam, Dame's policies are pretty widely hated. Really what he's doing is he's taking all of this money and all of these supplies from the United States, and he is enriching himself and his family and his friends, and he's not putting this money to any kind of policies that are going to make the lives of average, everyday Vietnamese people better. And so as a result of this, our involvement is going to slowly increase. In 1961, Kennedy sends special forces in to kind of help aid South Vietnamese in some of their missions and try and train their government. By 1963, we've got all these advisors, in quotes, over there to try and help shore up the South Vietnamese military. But really what's happening in 1963 is more and more American troops are doing some of the fighting. And what you see here is a Buddhist monk who dumps gasoline on himself and sets himself on fire in protest of not just Dame, but U.S. involvement in Vietnam. By late 1963, the South Vietnamese military is pretty fed up with Dame, and they ask President Kennedy if it's okay if they assassinate him, and Kennedy okays that because Dame really has kind of become a pain in America's side. So what is going to really increase then our involvement is this Gulf of Tonkin incident. And you did that whole assignment on the Gulf of Tonkin where supposedly these North Vietnamese torpedo boats attack the U.S. And that there's all kinds of hazy issues surrounding this. Regardless, what Johnson's able to do is he's able to take this to Congress and say, see, the North Vietnamese are being aggressors here. We need to try and repel and do more to protect ourselves. So Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which really gives Johnson a blank check. He can pretty much do whatever he needs to do to repel any attack, both present and any kind of further or future aggression. So it really gives him broad military powers in being able to deal with the Vietnam War.